Good afternoon, everyone. I do appreciate all of you showing up today. It is my pleasure to join you today and be presenting to you some information regarding the E-rate Form 470 and a number of other processes that are associated with E-rate applications. Welcome to E-rate season. It is, as I like to refer to it as E-rate silly season. It's time to get busy, very busy with many things as far as preparing for the upcoming E-rate funding year, which begins in about 6 months. Um, Today, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some things that aren't necessarily demonstration type things. I'm going to talk about procurement, the fair and open bidding process, RFPs. We will talk in some depth about mini bids and bid evaluation and then how to deal with bids if you go out to bid and don't receive any bids. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. I'm going to do a run through and a demonstration on how to fill out your discount data forms. I know a number of you have already done those and turned them in. We do thank you very much for being so diligent and getting those back to us as quickly as you have. Very much appreciated. If during the course of our discussion you realize that you may have made some sort of mistake or an error or need to fix something on that, don't hesitate to do so and send us a new copy. Just if you would, when you send it, just please point it out to us that you're sending us an updated version so that we can be sure that we're distinguishing between the older and the new one that has been corrected. We'll talk about, then we will do a formal demonstration of the step-by-step on the Form 470 filing process, and then we'll talk very briefly at the end about documentation, and document retention. I do want to make this, as we go through it, as interactive as we can. So I would encourage you, if you have questions, don't hesitate to use the raise your hand button in Teams and let us know. I would ask Caprice if you would, as we're going through this, keep an eye on that and just flag me down if I don't see it, if I don't recognize that somebody's raised their hand. I may be looking elsewhere, so if you can just give me a holler, that would be great. Thank you. So, without further ado, welcome to the session. Today, really big day for me personally. Today, I'm happy to say, is my 31st anniversary with my wife. We've managed to cross 30 years. It's been quite the haul, but we've managed to do that. And in addition to that, tomorrow I am leaving on a jet plane and heading to Mexico to do some mountain climbing. So with that in mind, I just want to mention that I will be back. I will be out all of next week, but I will be returning to the office the following week, just before our Forms 471 trainings begin. I'll discuss those briefly at the end here too. But if you have any questions or need any assistance during the next week and a half or so, I would encourage you to get in touch with Caprice. In all likelihood, she'll be able to walk you through whatever issues or questions you might have. But certainly, if issues arise and you need formal or you need some additional input, don't hesitate to go ahead and send me an email, copy Caprice on it. I will have allegedly, I will have connectivity while I'm out, and I do plan to try and keep up as much as possible with conversations and following up on emails and so on and so forth. I don't want to, as we get into this silly season, as I mentioned, it's sort of a bad timing, obviously, for me to be running around and gallivanting around the world. But I couldn't pass up the opportunity to do some climbing. I'm actually going to be climbing the third highest mountain in North America, Pico de Orizaba. Will be a good time, so I'm looking forward to that. But anyway, enough about me. Let's move into this. So. As we get started, let's talk about procurement. As one of the major components of E-rate, the acquisition of products and services, the one of the major tenets of E-rate has always been to have a fair and open bidding process. Now, the question then becomes, what is it meant by fair and open? In a broad sense, that simply means all bidders needed to be treated the same. Nobody can have, or nobody should have, any exclusive knowledge of a product excuse me, of a project. They shouldn't have any insider information. Now, don't worry, there is going to be, if you have a contract that you are replacing, one that's an old one that's expiring, and you have an incumbent provider, they may have some inside information that that they have because they have provided you with services in the past. That is not a problem. That is not something that you have to seek to avoid. It's really unavoidable. But for when you begin to present all of your documentation, any RFPs, any information about the project itself that needs to be accomplished, you need to make sure that all of the bidders have access to that information equally. So that you're not, say, for example, you're not during the commencement of the process, you are not supposed to be identifying a winning bid or a provider that you want to for sure have them bid on your project. You need to make sure that everybody has equal opportunity to bid on that project. You cannot you should be making sure that you are not accepting any gifts that might be offered by a vendor that might be bidding on your project. I know that there are some really, really arcane details with, there's like if the value of whatever they're offering you is de minimis, you're allegedly allowed to accept that. De minimis meaning it's like a pen or an eraser, something that they might hand to you at a conference, not really a problem. We're talking about buying you lunch, giving you tickets to go see a game, things like that. Things that might influence your decision making. The easiest way to avoid that is just making sure that you're not accepting any gifts that might be offered. You also need to make sure that that they're not offering free services that should otherwise or would otherwise have to be paid for in the bid that they are offering you. That would give them an unfair advantage competitively over anybody else who's bidding, and that really is the key here, is to try and maintain an equal competitive playing field. Also, then, in this fair and open process, all bidders are afforded, when you file a Form 470, all bidders are provided a 28-day waiting period, a 28-day period in which they have to respond to your Form 470, so that they have equal and ample time to respond. With respect to this fair and open process, part of the process that may be involved for you is issuing an RFP. Now, RFPs are not always required for all of the services that you can acquire through a Form 470. In fact, most commonly, an RFP is required for seeking dark or self-provisioned fiber networks or network components for dark and self-provisioned fiber. Those do require an RFP in order to request those services. Now, it's important to mention that when we talk about an RFP, USAC really is using the term fairly loosely. They are really referring to any kind of documentation that is going to help your potential bidders, give them a better sense of what it is specifically that you're looking for, and making sure that they have the information necessary to give you a viable bid. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a large 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 1,500 in some cases pages of information about the project, but it does need to provide them with the basics for how a vendor will complete the project, what it is you're asking them to do or provide, and any of the specific parameters that you might have. For example, you may be asking for specific speeds in terms of bandwidth that they might be providing, or you have certain functionality that equipment might need. You want to make sure that all of those things are laid out very clearly and spelled out for your bidders in an RFP. Now, that having been said, as I mentioned, you don't have to fill out you don't have to submit an RFP for everything that you're seeking. Which brings us to then, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we do the run through of the Form 470, but it is important then, if you are not going to be using an RFP, to use the narrative in the funding request, or excuse me, in the service request section of the Form 470. You need to be certain that you are providing ample information in those sections, in that section, so that a vendor can provide, again, a thorough and responsive bid. When it comes to RFPs, especially with larger projects, like wiring a new building or anything that might involve trenching, or really anything where you feel like a vendor, like for example, vendors in a larger procurement might submit to you a question. And when you get a question from a vendor, and you provide them with a response, you need to absolutely make sure that you are taking both the question and the response that you provided to that individual vendor and make that same information available to all of the potential bidders. So the question would be, well, how do you go about doing that? And to do that, we would add what's referred to as an RFP document. Again, it's going to be just a Word document or something along those lines that contains both the questions and the responses. So that vendor Q&A also needs to be posted in Epic, and we'll show you a little bit later where to go about doing that. But be aware that if you have any kinds of questions and answers that you get in response to an RFP or a bid, a service request that you have on the street, you need to make sure that you're providing all of that information to all of the potential bidders and not just one. Be aware that posting a Q&A doc, for example, does not necessarily restart the clock on your 28-day waiting period. You are allowed to provide responses or clarifications about your bid that as long as the responses to those do not change the scope and the breadth of your project in any significant way. I think the term that USAC likes to use is a cardinal change. Now, what exactly is cardinal? They've been pressed to define that, and they haven't really done a particularly good job of defining it. It reminds me of, quite honestly, it reminds me of the Supreme Court's ruling way back when regarding pornography, and they said, well, we don't know, we can't define it, but we know it is we know what it is when we see it. Which is kind of an interesting way out of answering the question. FCC has kind of done that with that whole cardinal change thing. But really, if it comes down to you're changing the number of widgets that you're asking for, or you're adding a new building to your project, or to the connectivity that you're requesting, you left out a location that needs to receive services in some fashion, that does change significantly the extent of your project, and so you would want to make sure that you restart the clock for your 28-day waiting period in response to a situation of that sort. There's really fine lines, and I'd say in most cases, your simple Q&A responses aren't going to make those changes. But if you ever have an instance where you feel like you're on the fence about whether it's 28, it should restart the clock or not, don't hesitate to give me a call, drop me an email. We can certainly discuss and make sure that that you're in a safe place, either by restarting the clock or being able to continue to move forward as originally started. I would also encourage you, and in your RFP and in your Form 470, to establish a due date for the responses that you're asking for. The due date is not necessarily 28 days after filing the Form 470. And this is a fairly recent clarification, I guess, that USAC has and FCC have issued with respect to this, in the sense that there was a case that occurred a year or so, maybe a little bit longer back, and what happened was that the applicant issued a Form 470, and then they waited their 28 days, and then there was an additional 10 days that went beyond the end of the 28, during which they did not do anything with the bids that they had received. And at the end of the and then after those 10 days, they got into the bids that they had received during the 28 days and did their bid evaluation and selected a winner. They were challenged on that by a vendor who had issued their bid in those 10 days after the close of the waiting period. And the FCC came back and they ruled that because they had not defined a clearly established due date for responses, that the district was in fact responsible for reviewing that response in addition to all that they had reviewed, that they had received during that 28-day waiting period. So to avoid that situation, you can simply establish, and I would recommend, if you want to keep things on a short time frame, make it a 30, make your specific due date an extra 2 days after the 28-day waiting period, just so that there's clearly that 28 days is over, you take another day, if something shows up a day late, 2 days late, but everything that you have received prior to that due date, you need to make sure that you're including in your bid evaluations. Also very, very important with respect to the RFPs is to make sure that you include any criteria which might result in an immediate disqualification. I use this example only because it's convenient in terms of like our state applications, our state 470s. One of the minimum qualifications for delivering service is that the bidder must be able to deliver services to all school districts in the state. And if they can't do that, we're not going to bother to go ahead and score their bid. So any criteria that you might have, such as maybe the vendor's not able to deliver to one particular building in your district. If that's the case and you don't want to have to deal with them because you want to make sure that you have a vendor who can provide services to all of your buildings, then that's fine. You can disqualify for them. You're allowed to do that, but you need to make sure that offhand disqualification is mentioned in your RFP or in the narrative, one or the other, so that a bidder essentially doesn't waste their time responding if they know that they're going to get disqualified anyway. That it's really that's the intent. Question.
Okay. Scott, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
No,
Chris Gordon has a question in the chat.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even see my chat go off. Okay. What if you need X number of widgets for the project and your remaining E8 C2 was X minus N number of widgets, but you don't know what that number is until after you receive? I would just mention that, Chris. I would just mention that in your mini bid, your request for quotes, and we'll talk about mini bids here in just a minute. But yeah, I would say, we're going to ask for X number. We know that our budget only covers, we only have X amount of money left in our budget. So we may not be able to purchase all of them. We might reduce this number, but at least make them aware of that as you're going forward. So it's kind of a CYA thing, really. Any other questions at this point? Chris, did that answer your question? I will assume. Good deal. Excellent. All righty then. So let's move on to actually talk about mini bids. The mini bid is a slightly different process. You are essentially going through the same style of competitive process, but the mini bid is conducted in a situation where you're going to be purchasing from a set of contracts that have multiple options for you. In this case, we are talking specifically about the networking components that are going to be purchased from KETS contracts, networking components and basic maintenance. Both networking and basic maintenance that's going to be purchased from KETS contracts, which, as you all know, or at least I hope you know, is required by state law for those products. So the state already went out, and the state did the procurement to establish those contracts. State law requires that you use those contracts. We already established their E-rate eligibility because we filed the Form 470 for those contracts. What you need to do, because there is multiple options for you, is you need to conduct what they refer to as a mini bid. So where the mini bid is concerned, what you need to do is to contact all of the KETS vendors, the vendors on those KETS contracts, and request the quote. Okay, so you're going to tell them what you're looking for. When you do so, you want to make sure that if you have, for example, let's say that you have XYZ ABC is the model number. It's Bob's Networking Components model ABC XYZ. If you're going to reference a specific product, and you're allowed to use it as a reference, always use the words or equivalent. Or equivalent. It's very, very important because, again, we're trying to make sure that there's a fair and open process here. If you simply say, well, we want this, you're already narrowing down that you don't want it from, you're going to get it, you want it from Bob. You don't want it, and you may want it from Bob, but in order to keep the process open, you have to make sure that Mary and Sue and Frank and William all get a chance to also bid on your project, on your request. So always ask for, if you ask for something by name, use the or equivalent as well. We have had instances where folks have been denied, or in worse cases, they've been funded up front, and then there have been situations where because they did not use that terminology, a challenge or a review reveals the fact that that was not the case, that they did not in fact say or equivalent, and so it's considered a competitive bidding violation. Is there a list of vendors for basic maintenance? It's the same ones, Billy Joe. It's the same ones as for the networking equipment. It is, and I will show you here, and I will actually take the address copy, and I will put it here. There we go. There we go. That link that I just posted in the chat will take you to the KDE Network Products and Services webpage. And on that webpage, there are folks that are referenced as being, inside sales or a sales manager or an account manager. You need to make sure that you contact one person from every one of those KETS contracts. Now, before I go on, I do want to make sure that you understand that you not only need to contact one for each of the manufacturers, but you also need to make sure that you contact at least one person at each of the resellers as well. Okay, so just be aware that that requirement is out there, that that both resellers and manufacturers are going to be contacted in your mini bid. I will say this. while it does sound as though, okay, you might send your request off to 12 or 15 different folks, it sounds as though you might get 12 or 15 responses back. And while you may get some, for the most part, my experience tells me that you're more likely to only hear from the folks that already have been doing business with you. In most cases, that's going to happen. In some cases, you may have some more ambitious folks from some of the other vendors also offering you, the products and services that you're seeking. Certainly, I would encourage you to give them the full attention and the full consideration during your bid evaluation. But it does seem to be the case that if you are Bob's shop, that and you're a Bob's networking shop, that usually Sue's networking resellers aren't likely to be providing a response to that bid if they know that you are a Bob shop, so to speak. Billy Joe, KEDC is not on one of the state contracts for basic maintenance. So if you are needing basic maintenance on KETS purchased equipment, you need to do a mini bid for basic maintenance for those components, so that they are covered. KEDC can provide basic maintenance, but it would have to be on non-KETS purchased products. You understand what I mean? I should say the anything that you purchase from a KETS contract, switches, routers, Wi-Fi hubs, et cetera, those things that you've purchased from the KETS contract need to be, you need to get basic maintenance for those from the KETS contracts as well. If you are talking about pieces of equipment that you did not purchase from the KEDS contracts that you purchased on your own, either with or without E-rate support, you can absolutely use KEDC to provide your basic maintenance for those items. Yeah, exactly, Billy. That's correct. Or oh no, sorry, that's yeah, Neil. Yeah, Neil's response to you, Billy Joe, is exactly right. That kind of gives you the sense. Just be aware that if you are going to get basic maintenance on things like wiring, racks, panels, etc., not the switches and routers, you will need to file your own Form 470 for those, because that's sitting outside of that little realm of the KETS contracts. All righty. Let's move on. I think, let's see where I live. Oop. Is the vendor manufacturer required to do the installation? Yes. Can KEDC bid at networking equipment such as Extreme switches? No, they are not. KEDC is not an identified reseller vendor for any of the KETS contracts currently. You have to go with yeah, sure. You do have to go with the KETS vendors for the purchase of the equipment, for the basic maintenance, and then and the installation. There is one exception to this, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Actually, I'll go ahead and just mention it now. One of the other things that is on the KETS contracts, or at least a number of them, is the managed internal broadband services, MIBs. That's for when you want somebody, a third party, to come in and provide your district with management of your network, serve your routers and switches and wiring, et cetera. Those services are not required to be purchased from the KETS contracts. Therefore, if you are seeking MIBs at all, you do need to file a Form 470 of your own. That said, you also know that some of those contracts have MIBs available on them, and you might want to purchase it from them, and that's fine. What you will need to do is include that contract as if it had been submitted to you as a bid. You're going to basically be looking at their pricing and their services and evaluating it as if it had been submitted to you as a bid, so that it is included in your bid evaluation. Then, if one of those CETS contract holders wins the MIBS bid, you purchase from them and you'll work with them directly. But you will not be able to get MIBS from the CETS contracts under the state's Form 470. Okay. And that is because you are not required to use those contracts for MIBS acquisition. Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes I feel like I'm tongue-tying myself, and it makes sense in my head, but that's a problem because if it makes sense in my head, it may very well not make sense in yours. All right, so let's get back to where we were. Okay, so yeah, mentioned for the 28-day waiting period. Okay, so yeah, in talking about the mini bids, as I mentioned, it's required for networking components and BMIC and installation purchased from the CETS contracts. As I mentioned, they're required by state law for you to use. You do need to, as I mentioned, contact all of the vendors, both the resellers and the OEMs, to ask for a quote. You are not required to file a Form 470. You are not required to wait 28 days after sending them the request for the quote. I do recommend giving them at least 10 business days for them to respond. The response that we get when we push USAC on how long can you give them, or how long or how short a time period can you turn around on them and still be within the rules, and they'll say, well, it needs to be a reasonable amount of time. I figure 10 days, 10 business days is generous enough that if somebody's out of the office for a period of time, they still would have the opportunity to come home or come back to the work and see your request and respond to you. I would also recommend that when you send out your request for quote, that you set a hard deadline. So if you give them 10 days, don't just say 10 days. Give them a specific date, and if you even really even want to, you can set a specific time if you want as well. So you set the parameters here. Just make sure that that they're going to meet your needs, and also give them a reasonable amount of time. And as I said, 10 days is 10 days, let's put it this way, 10 days has never been challenged in my experience. I did say business days. Yeah, good question, Jack. I'm suggesting 10 business days. You could probably get away with 10 calendar days. I mean, 28 is a calendar day kind of thing as well. So, however it works out, I would give at least, like, it wouldn't be unreasonable for example, to submit today and ask them for a response by the end of next Friday. So, the 13th, that's a good example. I think that would be fairly reasonable as well. I wouldn't want to cut it any shorter than like 7 business days. Good question. Good question. And yes, okay. And then with respect to a mini bid, just as you would with an RFP, you're going to evaluate the quotes as if you had filed a Form 470. You'll need to have some sort of bid evaluation matrix, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you'll go through that same process of evaluating the bids and selecting a winner. So the main difference, again, on the mini bid versus a Form 470 is the Form 470 goes out to the world and says, hey, everybody, we want services. And here's the services that we need. On the mini bid, you're just going to the state contract holders and saying, hey, state contract holders, we're in the market for switches, and we need this many switches, and we need them to have this capability. And you send that out to them. They provide you with a quote, and then you evaluate those quotes in a similar fashion to what you would do if you had filed a Form 470. I think somebody just posted. Oh, let's see. Many bids can be found. Thank you, Jody. Appreciate your posting that. That's great. Okay, so let's move on to bid evaluation. You need to make sure that for any procurement that you're doing under E-rate, or that you're going to receive E-rate funds for, that you have a bid evaluation matrix. And it can be a simple chart or a spreadsheet. You want to make sure that that has your criteria for evaluation listed. Excuse me, and then shows the possible points that might be assigned based upon the response that you were provided. And then you need to obviously complete that bid evaluation matrix for each of the bids that you receive. Remember, and we'll get into these important things, price must be the most heavily weighted criteria, but it doesn't have to be the only one, okay? So no matter what, if you break down the scoring, the one criteria that has the most value to it has got to be price. The rest of them can be close to the weight, but they can't be any more or equal to even price. Price must be most heavily weighted. There are, as I mentioned, other possible criteria you might be dealing with or might be wanting to address. Compatibility of the product with your existing infrastructure. Obviously, that's really, really important. Prior or past experience or performance by the vendor that's responding. If you have past experience and you're going to evaluate them on past experience or past experience, performance / reputation, anything like that can be included. Price of non-E-rate eligible items may also be considered, but that price of the non-E-rate eligible items will need to be lower than the price for the E-rate eligible services. The ability I mentioned earlier, I gave the example of the ability to serve the entire district, and then once you have your criteria established, once you've got your criteria established, you can then use that matrix to score each of your bids based on your criteria. So price doesn't have to be 51. Correct. That is correct, Justin. If you have 5, yeah, there you go. Jody's got a really good example. If you've got like 5 items, and you're going to break up 100 points over 5 items, you could do 25, 15, 20, 20, and 20. And, it all adds up to 100. Sure, great. But because that's could scoring up has. You'd have to have some sort of justification or explanation in your bid evaluation. I would put some notes with respect to that, prior experience with this vendor. I would make mention of something like that. So yeah, it could. It's a good question. It's a good question. You want to be careful with something like that, but it is a criteria that even USAC uses in their own examples with respect to criteria that might be included in your bid evaluation. So that's why I used that one. But yeah, you're right. It could be, that one's kind of a slippery slope. So yeah, I would be careful of that one. So then you've got, so you take the bids that you've received and you score them based upon the criteria that you've set up and the points that are assigned to each, and you're going to basically determine a winner. That winner is then going to be awarded the contract, or in this case, it might be just a purchase order or a purchase agreement. You do need to have some sort of either a purchase order or a quote, something that shows that they have provided you with the information you need in order to score their bid, and then also need to make sure that that all of the bids that you've received have been scored as well. That's you might find one. Oh, look, this one got like 98 out of 100. Nobody's going to beat that. That may be true, but you still need to go through the exercise so that you can demonstrate that a full, fair, and honest and open bidding process was utilized. So let's just for a moment assume that for the sake of demonstration that let's just say that no bids were received on your Form 470. You put out a 470 for, let's just say, a wiring project by way of example. And you didn't get any responses, but you know that there's a provider down the road who may have just not seen your Form 470. If you have received no bids after your deadline, either your 28 days or your 10 business days or whatever you set in your mini bid, you are allowed to reach out to vendors to request a bid. You may not reach out to a vendor to request a bid prior to the end of your 28-day or your 28-day waiting period or your waiting period after your mini bid. If you run into a situation such as this, and you go ahead and contact a vendor down the street and say, hey, can you, we've got this project. Would you be interested in providing me with a bid or a quote? You can do that. You still have to score it. You still need to be in some way, shape, or form able to demonstrate that it is a cost-effective solution for you. And the way that you do that, and at least in the E-rate program, is to conduct your bid evaluation for every bid that you receive, including ones that are provided to you after you have to reach out if you didn't receive any bids on the Form 470. Make sure that if you receive none, that you send yourself an email or that you set up a small Word document that memorializes this fact. And maybe it's just you could send an email to your finance person or your superintendent, for example. I'm just using this as an example, and just say, hey, as of this date, our bidding window is closed. The 28 days have cleared. Our deadline for response has passed, and as of this date, nobody responded. And while your finance officer will probably look at that and go, yeah, okay, so unless you give them a little bit of a heads up as to what's coming, you will have it in fact memorialized in that email as of that particular date. That will then be able to refer to that email and retain it should you be asked for that under any kind of review that might take place, or audit, for example, later on down the road. So you retain that for your documentation. You could just take a copy of it, an electronic copy. It's worth noting that that USAC now accepts all of the documentation that they accept electronically now. They don't have any requirements for any paper to be preserved. It can be all, if there's anything that is on paper, it can be scanned. So there's no reason to fill up rooms full of paper documentation any longer. You can fill up the ones and zeros on hard drives instead. So that kind of that pretty much covers the basics of the procurement for the RFPs, mini bids, bid evaluation. Are there any questions on that at this point? Once again, Jody, thanks for throwing out the links there. That's really helpful. And if you have a question, you feel free to unmute and just ask if you want. Is there a form to use for mini bids or just generic? It is generic, Matt. You write up your own little email outlining what you're looking for, and you can send it off. There's no online form that you have to fill out when you're conducting one. That's a good question. Excellent. Any others, if anybody's brave enough to unmute and speak? All right, I will move on. Going back to my teaching days, I've given proper wait time. All right, what I'm going to do now is dive into a quick overview and run through of discount data. And I am going to share my screen so that fortunately you don't have to look at me anymore. I don't know how you can stand it, frankly. Creeps me out every time I don't have to comb my hair anymore because I finally cut it all off. All right. Caprice, give me a thumbs up if you can see the discount data sheet now. Awesome, thank you. All righty, so I'm going to take this kind of from the top. We sent a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I guess now, the discount data forms. The discount data forms were populated with, oops, wrong one. I see somebody that might have a question here. There we go. When you get responses, you'll do, sorry, that's, yeah, okay, Matt, or Jody's just responding to Matt. Okay, thanks, Jody, appreciate your jumping in there. So we sent you the discount data form. What we did was we pulled NSLP eligibility and enrollment for each of your main school buildings. And we pulled it from Infinite Campus, dropped it into the spreadsheet that we sent you. Hopefully, we were able to find, in most cases, if formulas had been accidentally erased or whatever. I think for the most part we got that. I've had a couple folks say, "Hey, mine isn't working," and I apologize for that. I probably overlooked that when I was entering all the data from the master file that was sent from our data team. Anyway. You have a quick overview at the top of this of all of the data that we pulled. The district entity number that comes from USAC, that's not going to change. Your district name hasn't changed. The district enrollment is an automatically calculated figure that comes from the total number of enrollment, all the numbers that you put in for enrollment. The district NSLP eligible is calculated automatically from column D and all of the entries that are in it. And then we move into some other options, but these are the basics in terms of what goes into determining your overall discount percentage. You may have some small changes that need to be made to these. We did, when we did the data pull, we did have pre-K removed. So pre-K should not be included, but these numbers should, generally speaking, match up with the information in Infinite Campus that you have, because it's pulled from State Edition, which just goes out and gathers what you all enter into your local editions. But the date of data that's listed in the certification box should match up. The enrollment and NSLP should match up with what you have in Infinite Campus for that date as well. The reason we chose the particular dates that we chose was because we ran an analysis to determine which date gave you the highest percentage of eligible NSLP students in the building that day. Okay, so that you would end up with the highest district percentage. That said, you may end up finding that there are other dates there that you have that were perhaps earlier or later in the month that are that actually will result in a better percentage, or, and we'll talk about CEP here in a minute, CEP data, which may also improve this as well. So just be aware that you may find that you need to make some adjustments to these. I would imagine that they would be small. I don't, adult ed students shouldn't be included in this as well. It should be just 1 through 12. But you may find that there are some discrepancies and if you feel need to change those, to make sure that they all represent accurately the data that you have available to you, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. We will be taking the data that you supply in this district discount data form and entering it into what's referred to as the state valid file. The state valid file is what we send to USAC so that when they look at your applications, like when you go to file for your network between your buildings, or you go to file for networking equipment in your closets, they're going to look and say, well, this district gets or has claimed that they get such and such a discount, like in this case, a 60% discount. They will seek verification on that, and the first place they go, or the first place they're supposed to go, is to that state valid file and to look it up and say, does the state say that what the buildings or the district says is accurate? Do they match? If they do, they should be just moving right along and on to the next thing that they're supposed to be checking in reviewing your application. If those don't match, they're going to come back and say, well, why don't these match? And they will probably, in all likelihood, ask for some sort of state verification. Well, we're going to verify the numbers that you provided on this form. Now obviously they need to be backed up by documentation, either state's documentation from Infinite Campus or documentation from at your local level. So you need to make sure that you're not just making numbers up, obviously. But once these numbers are established, you can then imagine the importance of them, not just to our state application, which they filter through to the state application as well, but also to you in any applications that you might file as well. I do see that we have a question. Scott, on a couple of my schools, the total enrollment may have been off by one student. Just sent back with an updated number. Okay, good. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Can we use data from January 3rd, 2023? Yes, Lamar, you can. And I am going to get here into CEP for just a moment so that you can see how it works. But yes, you can use, if you need to use January 3rd data, sure. We want to make sure that you are optimizing you're optimizing your discount. So if that helps you to achieve the next discount level, by all means, go for it. And that having been said, it's also worth noting that if going through changing this or adding CEP or whatever doesn't make any difference, you don't really need to do anything other than what's already been provided. So you can, if you choose, just make sure that you're signed off, that you give it a signature date, and send it back to us. Ronnie, no, we cannot use pre-COVID data anymore. We were allowed to do that for 2021, and we were allowed to do that for 2022. We are no longer allowed to do that. That exception is off the table. Jonathan asks, our day treatment and detention center shows zeros for enrollment in our discount data sheet you sent. Is this happening because DJJ provides their lunch instead of us? Likely, that's probably the case. They are your students, however, so I would say, go ahead and add those figures as long as those students aren't being counted already in some other location. So, for example, if the DJJ kids are enrolled in the high school, but they happen to be at the DJJ center, and they're just there for a month or whatever, and then they're coming back, and their official enrollment doesn't change, that would mean that then they've probably been already counted at the high school. So you just want to make sure that you've got that addressed. Okay, next question. Is it still the case that USAC allows CEP districts to use the same data for up to 4 years? Well, Drew, there's a I need to split some hairs on your question. Forgive me. You can use the same CEP percentage for 4 years. You can't use the same enrollment for 4 years. Enrollment needs to be updated now every year. Now that we're past COVID, we're going back to enrollment being updated every year. The CEP percent may still be being used by your food service folks, and that was established 3 or 4 years ago. In that case, you're going to enter a CEP, the CEP ISP that they're using, the identified. Oh, for heaven's sake, it's an identified student population. Yeah, something like that. Identified student percentage, something like that. ISP stands for. It's the percentage of students that have been directly certified eligible for free and reduced lunch without having to file an NSLP form. Those students were identified through their families' participation in some other program that already directly demonstrates that they have need. Let's see. So I'll go back to the question, make sure I answered it. So yeah. So and then the CEP base year will be the year that CEP percentage was established. So if your food service folks are still using like one from 2021 or 2020, yeah, that's where you would enter that date. If the food service folks are using an ISP that was established just this early January, or excuse me, not January, April. They do reporting in April and October. If their most recent ISP is from April, then you would simply put 2022 in the base year because it was April of 2022 when that CEP ISP was first used. Okay, so Chris, do we need to update the student enrollment numbers for each school in EPIC based on these numbers from yes. The enrollment numbers for each school in EPIC, both the enrollment and the total NSLP eligible will need to be updated so that they match whatever is in the discount data form. I have a school with blank numbers. Does the date I used to pull that school? Yeah, that's a good question, Steve. Yeah, we need to make sure that the snapshot is an equal snapshot across the same date. Yeah, you're not allowed to pick and choose which dates. So it may be, Steve, that you might find that once you deal with that school that has blank numbers, it might be better for you to use a different date for all of the schools. That's fine. You can do that. Just make sure that the data that's coming from all of the schools is all from the same day. Jonathan, students are enrolled in day treatment and respectively. They are schools. Okay. And they for whatever reason they did not get pulled in the Infinite Campus poll. So just go ahead and add those. Ronnie, how do we count ATC students? Okay, in the vast majority, that's a good question. These are great questions. Thank you. In the vast majority of cases, ATC students are counted at their home school, whatever you want to call that, like where they're initially assigned. In the vast majority of cases, it's going to be the high school. Okay, so I'm just going to use that as the example. Those students are already counted once at the high school. They're not allowed to be counted elsewhere. But the ATC is still eligible, so it still needs to be on the discount data form. What you'll need to do is make sure that ATC is established in EPIC in their profile, in the building profile, as what's called a general use school. That general use school indicates that those students, it's that building gets general use. It's used by more than one one set of students, and those students might come from multiple schools in the district. And in some cases, those students might even come from other districts. That's fairly common, obviously, in the ATC example. So you want to make sure that If that's the way that your students are counted, you want to make sure that those students are included in the enrollment for their high school, and you have zeros in columns D and E for the ATC. ATC, we always use the number when the most students. Yeah, that's Tyler. That's no longer an issue. That is not correct. Quite honestly, I don't mean to be blunt, but you'll forgive me for if I sounded that way. The way that we used to count those students, where we used to use the whole thing of what was the peak number of part-time students. That was the term they used, the peak part-time students. That's no longer referenced at all. The counting of part-time students doesn't occur. And for what it's worth, that was related to establishing your C2 budget, which is no longer an issue because buildings don't have their own individual C2 budgets anymore. It's a district-wide C2 budget. So those students are going to be counted once, and they're going to be counted only once every time. Though they won't be double counted like they used to be. And that's a good example of where they used to be counted twice for purposes of calculating the C2 budget. That is no longer operates that in that fashion. And if you have further questions about that, Tyler, don't hesitate to ask. Teresa says, does the ISP percentage have to be from the official food service report submitted, or it can be calculated based on the date of the data pull, October 27th? So Teresa, you're asking, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're asking, can I go to my food service program and pull the ISP for that date? You can, but I really recommend using the official food service report. That's the most easily verified if there was ever any question about it. That is the instruction that we've been given, is that there's an ISP that's established that's used in April and October for reporting. And whatever the most recent one of those that was used is for any given building is what that ISP should be for that building. So that's the instruction we've been provided. So generally speaking, no, I would go to your official food services report submitted in April or October. Obviously, the most recent one will have been from this past October, and determine what that percentage is, and then when that percentage was initially used. It might go back farther than just this past October. It might actually go for significantly farther back. It could go back as far as 3 or 4 years. Okay, Jody's there. Could you check the CEP EB multiplier? I'm not sure, Stephen, what you mean by the EB multiplier. If you can help me on that, I will see if I can help you with that. Oh, there it is. See, I've got this little sign here that says new messages. I can't make it go away. Okay, Stephen. I'm going to say, do me a favor, Stephen, and send me a copy of your discount sheet, and I will make sure that it is operating as it is supposed to do. You might mention that that in this new 5-year Cat 2 window, C2 budget is district-wide. Yeah, okay. I think I did mention that. Good. So just put 00. Yes, Tyler, that's correct. Oh, you guys have already answered a bunch of these questions. That's great. CEP numbers came from a food service. Cannot confirm that pre-K students were not added. That's understood. If you can't factor them out because you just don't know, that's fine. Just use the CEP percentage that you have available to you. But I would try to make sure that if you can, that you've backed out any percent, any students that were included that are pre-K.
Hey Scott, this is Jody. Can I jump in for a second? I'll give you a moment to breathe here and maybe catch up on those questions. So one thing I want to mention, and I please back me up if I'm stating this incorrectly. I know the data pools that we provide at the department level are based on what we think is the best for the district NSLP data, but so many of our districts use CEP. Obviously, we're getting a lot of questions on CEP. That is usually such a help to districts with that 1.6 multiplier that I generally would tell people, if you use CEP, and for somebody brand new, that's the program, community eligibility, where you're feeding all your kids for free. You're probably deleting this data that was sent and changing it and adding the proper CEP percentages and the proper enrollment that you work with your food service people to get. You're probably changing the data, is my point. Just because we don't put the CEP percentages in anything that we send out, because we don't pull based on that. Is that a fair statement?
It is indeed, for certain.
So yeah, and I'm assuming it when you get through the questions, you're going to kind of go through where you enter the numbers from the one column over to the other one to make sure that the spreadsheet calculates properly. Okay. Great.
Yes, I will absolutely mention that.
Great, thanks.
Sure, thank you.
Hey Scott, this is
yes.
Stephen. I finally got my stuff back online.
Okay.
On what I was talking about, if you look in the cell reference for a CP NSLP, if you click on that right there, on my spreadsheet, see right here it says G10, A10, that all matches. On mine, it's one cell reference below. Instead of saying,
Okay.
So it should match up all the way across, but it's not. It's one below. That's what I was.
Okay, that's odd.
So it's like you get this point right here, but it's referencing that number, like the 640 number instead of the 793.
Okay.
And that's with all my, because I was just kind of go through playing my percentages and got down to where it said Southwest had 0. It's like, what? So I went back and checked my cell references and they were off by 1.
Okay. You should be able to change those so that the cell references are the proper row in the very first one, and then just copy it down.
Okay.
Yeah. That should work.
Okay. I was just trying to make sure that I understood what it's supposed to be, and it should be all the same roll number.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Something got a little goofy there.
It's all right. All right. Thank
Apologies.
you, sir.
Yeah,
no problem.
Sure thing. Thank you. Jason, use the FRAM eligibility report. Yeah, that's fine. You can use that too. And that helps you exclude the preschool count. So yeah, I mean, if you did need to make, if the only way to make sure that your preschool is not included in your ISP, you can use that FRAM eligibility report as well. There have been a couple of DD spreadsheets sent with missing formulas. Yeah, just send it. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Okay. I thought. Okay. Thanks. Once the report's running, source. Yep. Good. That should help folks. I love how you guys help each other out. That's awesome. You probably have this on your list of covers. I mentioned they calculate differently. Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Bruce. Yeah, I'm headed in that direction for sure. Okay, so while we're talking about CEP, let's talk about it some more. So you go to your food service person, or you go to your FRAM module and spit out your report, and you find that I'll just use 47.32%. Okay, and we determined that number came from April of 2020. So we would enter. Whoops! Look at that. All right, we're gonna have to format the cells. Shouldn't have to do that, but okay. Yeah, oh, that's prize. Okay. No, that's not supposed to be. That's supposed to be just a number. There. And 2020 was the example I gave. Okay. So notice then that it did the calculation on the CEP multiplier. And what it does is it basically takes this number and multiplies it times this times 1.6. And the reason why it actually increases, and Jody was mentioning this earlier, is that the reason why this increases your overall eligible is because this is multiplied times 1.6. That 1.6 multiplier has been put in place by USDA to essentially account for the kids who would be eligible for reduced price lunch, but those reduced price lunch kids don't show up in a direct certification report. So a kid whose family is eligible for Medicaid, for example, that kid's going to be automatically identified as eligible for NSLP, and he'll show up in your CEP count. But he doesn't show up if the family isn't on Medicaid, but the family doesn't make he makes just slightly too much to be on Medicaid, so he doesn't show up, but he's still eligible for a reduced price lunch. He's not going to show up. That child's just not going to be accounted for, and so schools would be losing out on funding. So USDA implemented this multiplier, and USAC adopted it. USAC/FCC adopted it and have implemented it. And what it does, as Jody pointed out, is it usually results in a fairly significantly higher number of students being eligible than what would have been reported based on collecting NSLP forms or household income forms, whatever was used to establish that NSLP eligibility. So yeah, you go ahead and you enter that. Let me put this here on Y. And the multiplication, then you can see that it makes a huge difference over where you were before. The one thing that you need to do in order to get this to correctly calculate is you need to copy that number, and you can either do a copy or you can just simply go over and overwrite. And it's probably easier because if you copy, you might end up copying the formula, which you don't want to do. But you want to make sure that column D reflects what's in column I. And yes, Bruce, I'll get to what you were mentioning earlier. So this currently says 600. Okay, so that makes a big difference. And look at that, you just jumped from 60 to 80% in the discount. It's an important thing. That's an important thing. It makes a big difference in terms of how much money you can get back or you can save on the goods and services you're going to be purchasing. Be aware that for whatever reason, and I think I finally figured out what it is, but for whatever reason, this uses a standard round process. It rounds the number up or down based on the old, well, at least what I was taught way back in math class was anything at 0.5 or above goes up and anything at 0.49 or below goes down. I think USAC inside of EPIC actually has their system set up to calculate that if there is a if there's anything above the integer, it automatically gets rounded up.
They do, Scott.
Is that what it is?
If there's part of a kid, they let you count the whole child. Whereas here we're doing spreadsheet rounding.
Yeah, exactly. So what might happen is that when you enter this CEP percentage in EPIC, and we'll show this in a minute, this number might come out to be one more than what it is on the spreadsheet. In EPIC, it would show 601 because there was a portion of a kid. And so every kid counts, even portions of them. So what we would ask is that if you go in and you notice that this is the case, in column D for the school that's in question, just enter that number that's been adjusted by EPIC, because I'm not smart enough yet to figure out how to do a special kind of round like that. And I'm sure there's a way to do it. I'm no Excel guru, so I will need more training and information on how to do that for future iterations of this. But yeah, be aware that that's the case. And if that is the case, then we would ask that you just please enter the number in column D for that building that shows up in EPIC. I think that pretty much sums it up. You just need to make sure then that your date of data, if you use enrollments from a different date than what was provided, change this to match whatever date that was that your enrollments are coming from. Make sure that you have signed off on it. Electronic signature is fine. You don't really even need to, and I like some people like to put in their like handwritten and then scanned. That's fine. You can do that too, not a problem. But you don't need to do that. You can just type it in, and then the date that you completed it, and then send it back to us. So column D should match if yes, that's correct. Column D should match Epic if it's a CEP school. That's correct. Good question, Matthew. Look at Randy Bailey. You are the man. Look at you. See? Thank you. I won't be implementing that change for everyone right now. We're going to go with what's out there, but no, that's thank you. See, I would be lost without you guys. That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so once you got that all set up, you send it back and you should be good to go. So the question is then, let's get, how do we get this data into Epic? And what we've got going with Epic is the building profiles. Now, in order to access your building profiles, you'll need to log into Epic, do the multi-factor authentication, blah, blah, blah. Scroll down to the section that says My Entities. And then for each school district in your building, or excuse me, each building in your school district, easy for me to say, click on the name of the building, go to the top right corner where it says Manage Organization, click on it. This will then open up those fields that you were just seeing in the summary and allow you to make changes to some of it, not necessarily all of it. But the ones that the ones that we need to make sure get addressed are the number of full-time students, number of part-time students, et cetera, et cetera. I mentioned about the ATCs, that if you have 0 and 0 for your ATC, you want to make sure that your ATC is marked off as a general use school. So there's one thing you'll want to do even for an ATC. I'm going to uncheck that because these are not ATCs. So then we go to, okay, this is school building. We're an A, right? Yeah, school A. So for school A, we take the number of the enrollment, which is 793. 793. And this is our CEP school. By the way, if you have some schools that are CEP and some that are not, that's fine. You can use a combination of CEP and NSLP, just not use a combination for the same building. You have to use either CEP for a building or NSLP for a building, not both. All right, so we're going to say yes for this CEP building. I don't know why that's there, because that's not. And then we said what, 47.32. 47.32. Notice that, there's the perfect example. That worked great. Oh yeah, and our calculation showed 600. The actual calculation should be 601 because we have a portion of a student, so it goes up, and you just make that adjustment in your discount data sheet, and then come back and enter the base year as well. You don't need to worry about all this other stuff that's in here. If there are changes to mailing addresses, things like that, this is where and when you should make those changes. Now is the time to be doing that during what they refer to as the administrative window. So we'll submit that. 2023 change we'll just call it the enrollment update. And bada bing, bada boom, those changes have been made. You go through the same process for all of your buildings. So we'll do the same real quick. Manage organization. And scroll down. Here we are using NSLP. We have 649, 298. $49, $298. There's not a discount. Okay, there's not a discount, alternate discount method. If you were doing surveys as opposed to NSLP, you would definitely use that. I think most folks are just using standard NSLP or whatever basic household income forms are being used to gather that information. Does this, there's no endowment, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now, one last thing before I move on. Down here is the Category 2 budget information for each school at the bottom of it. This is for the purposes of the C2 budget. You are allowed, okay, let me back up, see if I can express this in one complete thought. At the beginning of every 5-year budget cycle, in that first year, they take the enrollments for each building and they calculate for you a C2 budget. If those numbers, if those enrollment numbers go up during that window or during that 5-year cycle, you are permitted to ask for and request a C2 budget update, which will increase your C2 budget. Obviously, if your numbers went up, you want to do that. And so I would encourage you to do that. That will increase the amount of money you're eligible for the rest of this budget cycle. However, if your numbers go down and you request a budget renewal, your C2 budget will go down. You are not required, either way, by the way, to change that C2 budget during that 5-year cycle, up or down. Now, obviously, up is going to help you, so you'd want to do that. If it goes down, it's not going to help you, so you don't want to do that. So what I'm going to say here is, with respect to these C2 budget and entered information, that's if those numbers have gone up, I would certainly enter those numbers here, submit this, and then request a C2 budget update. If they have gone down, leave them alone. Okay, that's really, really key. Leave them alone. That way, nobody's going to be tempted to go hit a button and give you an update, and an update that would hurt you and you didn't want in the first place. Hopefully that makes sense. I think I got that out in a way that makes sense. But then again, it's easy for me to make sense to myself. Does anyone use the entity profile update template? I'm not aware of anybody that does. I have not. I've not tried that. Now, obviously, Justin, for you, that might be something that would be helpful. I think for the most part, everybody's fairly small other than you all. And so it's probably easier not to. If you want, Justin, if you want to talk about that a little bit further, we can take that offline and have that discussion. How do we adjust the total students for C2 budget if one of our, that's interesting. Those students would be counted elsewhere. You're not required, again, you're not required to recalculate. I mean, those students, as long as they stayed within the district, I don't see a problem with just keeping that building there as far as having those students being calculated or included in the C2 budget calculation. I would just leave well enough alone, Drew, to be honest with you. How does one ask for AC? I knew somebody was going to ask that. Thank you, Bruce, by the way. Yeah, category 2 budget. Oh, yeah, wait a minute here. Cancel. I have to submit this first. Yeah, whatever. Okay. Wasn't required the last time I did this. Okay. Category 2 budget. Oh, sorry. That's doing it for just the school. To request a category 2 budget update for the entire district, we need to go into the district profile. Click on that. Category 2 budget. I think this is where it happens. Nope. Oh goodness, where? I'm gonna have to look that up, to be honest with you. Yeah. Anybody done this? I haven't done. I saw it just the other day. As I was looking through this and practicing, and I can't find it. Let's see. Nope, that's okay. You know what? We're kind of getting tight on time. Bruce, I will figure that out, and I will send the KEs a quick description on how to do that. I could probably also look it up on the stuff. That's possible, Neil. I don't recall. Might be questions. Yeah, that might be as well. But yeah, I will go ahead and get that information out through the KEs after we are done. It might be, Marianne, it might be. I'm gonna go through this real quick. We got about 4 minutes, and fortunately, a Form 470 really isn't that hard. So I'm gonna go real quickly because I've covered pretty much everything I want to. I do want to do just a quick run through of a Form 470. So to get started on one, click on FCC Form 470 in the upper right corner of the landing page, and this will actually start your new form. There's a couple of pretty basic things to start with. Okay, well, yeah, I know they're not responding. Y'all can still hear me, yes? I just want to make sure it's not my connectivity here that is okay. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is enter a nickname. This is going to be something that helps you remember. So that's the way, I would just use some nickname that references, this might be the 2023 wiring project 470. Just give you that example. But you want to put in something that's going to be helpful for you to remember what the 470 was asking for, and then save and continue. The next couple of pages are really just review type things, much like in the Form 471. Just make sure that your data here that's listed is in fact accurate. If it's not, you'll want to go back to the building profiles and make adjustments to them. If you have a consultant, you'll want to make sure your consultant is referenced here. Of course, the consultant's probably doing it for you anyway, so that's probably immaterial. Are you the main contact person? Most likely, the answer is going to be yes. It will enter your information automatically. If you are not, it does need to be someone who is as an Epic user. So if they are not already set up as a user in Epic, you will need to set them up to do that. If you have questions on that process, there are instructions on USAC's website as to how to do that. Save and continue. What category of service are you requesting? On a Form 470, you can request both Category 1 and Category 2, unlike a Form 471 where you have to choose one or the other. You can ask for everything you want for the entire year on a single Form 470. You can't necessarily do that on a Form 471. So just be aware of that. I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to run with Category 2 as the example right now. So I'm going to save and continue. Is there an RFP for this? We'll use the example of yes, just because we want to be able to show this fully. And then I'm going to take a copy of the document that is my RFP and upload it. Automatically uploads, gets checked for viruses, et cetera, et cetera. You can remove it just by clicking the X. If you mouse over it, you can remove it by clicking the X. And then we'll move on to the next page, save and continue. RFP. If applicable, please select the RFP that's going to apply to all new Category 2 services. Check that off and save and continue. Obviously, if you don't have an RFP, it won't be asking you about that. How will an increase in discount rate work if you have an existing contract in place for network services? You'll just get more money back, or you should be receiving a bigger discount on your bill. That may take a little bit of coordination between yourself and your service provider to make sure that they are aware that your discount has changed. So I would make sure that you have contact with them to let them know. So here's where we're going to get into adding the details of our service request. I would give some sort of description of what it is I'm seeking. I'm just going to use that as an example, but you would want to here provide lots of detail. Disqualification factors, details about locations where the services are going to be received, the types of functionality that you might be looking for if you have something in particular that you know that you're looking for. Don't forget those words or equivalent. Yeah, Frank, you're right. It will be fun. Sorry about that. So anyway, in your narrative, you want to make sure that, especially if you are not using an RFP, you do want to be particularly descriptive here, because this is basically your only place you can provide that description and the details of it. Then we will save. Oh, sorry. We are going to add a new service request to go along with our narrative. And here's where we're going to give some of the basic details about what we need. I'm going to use the example of basic maintenance here, since that might be something that's a little bit more common than the equipment. So we're going to check that off, and then it's going to ask you some follow-up questions. So, okay, you're going to ask for basic maintenance. So what do you need basic maintenance on? You can select what it is that you're going to be looking for your support on, and then you can actually enter a preferred. I'm going to pick one that's not on a state contract, just so I'm being kind of fair. So you can indicate your preferred manufacturer. What this is going to do ultimately is, I know that we've said you can't say you want this item. No, you can't, but you can say that there's a preferred manufacturer. What it will do is this will automatically add the words or equivalent to your Form 470. Remember, in a mini bid, you don't have a form to fill out, so you need to make sure you add those words or equivalent on your own. So let's say we have 100 access points that we want basic maintenance on, and there's 3 schools where that takes place. Well, actually, it was only 3, and we got no, we want 2 because only 2 of them are eligible locations in our example here. So we fill out this basic, just this really basic information, and save. And now we've added that as a service request. If you have more service requests, you can add more. They would be related service requests, whatever's related to whatever you've described in the narrative. So make sure that you don't have something up here that's not talked about in the narrative, or vice versa. And then we will save and continue. Let's see. Summary page. Okay. There we go. That's the one I was looking for. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point, Bruce. It does make it easy. All right. Save and continue. It'll ask if there's a technical contact. That would be somebody other than the main contact. If you don't have anybody, just click no. Again, if you have yes, there's a technical contact, it will ask you for that person's name. That person will need to be an Epic user. Basics on the procurement information. Is there state or local procurement competitive bidding requirements that apply to the procurement of services sought? only if you are going to be doing some sort of including of the state, like for MIBs. Actually, that wouldn't even apply here either, would it? It wouldn't, now that I think about it. We have had some standard text that we used to put here, and it would apply to C category 1 equipment. So I will also send that out with the budget update information. There is some language that we've sent out each year that basically just references the requirement for schools to use the CATS contracts to procure particular items, and it just gives the Kentucky regulation references in that. So that's basically your Form 470. You go on to the next page, it asks you to review what you've already entered. Notice that it will actually kind of take you out of the Form 470, and it will say that, you know, when the 470 PDF is ready, it will show up as a task in your tasks menu. Now, I don't think unless you refresh the page, it's not going to show you until you go to that tasks page. Oh, see, and the one showed up. Okay. And then we click on that, and it comes then to the Form 471 or 470 review. You have the ability to then download a copy of the draft Form 470. I encourage you, download it, look it over, make sure that it is accurate as absolutely possible as it can be, and then check off the button, continue to certification. Yes, we are going to certify our Form 470. All of these certifications on a Form 470 are ones that need to be checked off. Okay, I highly encourage you to review what you are certifying. Know what you are saying you are certifying to. Be aware of what you're saying is true, and make sure that it is true before you check it off. And then when you're all said and done, whoops, let's see, oh yeah, I unchecked this one too, didn't I? Okay. And then certify, you say yes, tries to scare you. Ooh, you might go to jail if you're lying. Yeah, you know that. And now the Form 470 is started, and as is the 28-day waiting period clock. The last couple things I wanted to mention, and I will turn off my sharing at this point. The last couple things I did want to mention are just really about document retention. The email that I mentioned that you would send to yourself if you got no bids. Scoring of every one of the received bids that you got, or the quotes that you got in your mini bid. The bid evaluation matrix itself. Any of the quotes and the bids that you've received. Any RFP documents. Any question and answer documents. I'm going to have to come back to that in just a second. Any of these documents that you have been using in this procurement, you will need to maintain for 10 years from the last date to receive services. And those are different dates, because C1, the funding year ends June 30th. C2, the funding year ends September 30th. So be aware that it might be, you know, it will be important to hold on to this for 10 years to either June 1, or excuse me, either July 30, excuse me, June 30, if I can get it right, June 30 or September 30. That is a long time, and you might actually be establishing a contract that might be a 5-year contract. So you would actually hold on to the documentation for 10 years from the last the last date to receive service of the final year that the contract was used for E-rate purposes. So you start with a 5-year contract, and you end up having that documentation around for 15 years, actually 16 by the time it's all said and done. So just be aware that, yeah, your documentation lasts a long time, and you need to make sure that you are being very, very thorough in keeping all of those things, because you will be asked for it. If you're ever audited, you will be asked for everything that I just mentioned in terms of your bid evaluations and the bid process. So be aware of that. Yeah, exactly. And it could be longer if you ask for an extension. Exactly. Could be longer. Yeah, there's always a what if that gets or a one-off kinds of unusual situations. The last thing I will show you really quickly, and I go back to sharing again, is let's say that you have a question and answer document that you just generated for your RFP. You sent out an RFP, you got some questions from vendors, you answered those questions, but you want to make sure that all of the vendors have answers to all of the questions. How do you make sure that happens? I'm glad you asked. Go to the bottom of your landing page, find the Form 470 that you just created. Use your drop-down menus to select the criteria to find it. Click on the nickname, and then across the top of the resulting page, click on Related Actions, and then you can add an RFP document. So you'll take your document, drop it there, make sure that you associate it to any of the the service requests that you have included on your 470, and then click Submit. Yes, it does make, see, it makes mention of substantial change to the scope of the services. It may or may not start the 28-day clock. All depends on what you had or the way that you answered any questions that you received. So yes, submit, and now you have added that to the Form 470, so that when a vendor goes to search for 470s, they will get not only the RFP that you already included, but they will also have access to those Q&A responses that you gave. I've already actually gone over by about 10 minutes. Go figure. I like to talk. Sorry about that, folks. If you do have any questions, I'm going to hang on for a little bit, but I think that's kind of the last I have at this point. So I do want to thank you once again for joining us today. As I said, I will be back in the office the week after next on Tuesday, and then right after that, I think we start our Form 471's trainings like the Thursday after I get back. So looking forward to seeing all of you there. I will say check your local listings to find out about the 471 training in your area. Again, I'll hang on here, but thank you all for joining us, and I hope that you found this helpful and informative. I imagine that those of you who have heard this before probably didn't get a whole lot new, but a lot of you who are new probably feel like this would be kind of trying to take a drink from a fire hose. Anyway, I appreciate your time and be here to help you out as much as possible. I am leaving tomorrow morning, Frank, and I will be back on Tuesday the 17th. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Megan, if you want to go ahead and stop the recording, that's great. I appreciate it, and I'll hang on.